We start with the big story. It is a historic verdict. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been found guilty for the murder of George Floyd. After an emotional 3-week trial, the jury delivered its verdict in less than 2 days. It found 45-year-old Derek Chauvin guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter for the killing of George Floyd, a black man on a street corner last year. It will be another 8 weeks until Chauvin is sentenced. Until then, he will be held in jail.
12646.
The verdict brought on tears of relief and joy for the family of George Floyd, his brother telling reporters that he was finally able to breathe again. The family also said the conviction was just the beginning and the fight continues for justice for those killed by police in America.
I really didn't think we were going to get guilty on all 3 counts.
We have to protest because it seems like this is a never-ending cycle.
Yeah.
Reverend Al always told me, we got to keep fighting.
That's right.
I'm going to put up a fight every day because I'm not just fighting for George anymore. I'm fighting for everybody around this world.
Yeah.
I get calls, I get DMs, people from Brazil, from Ghana, from Germany, everybody, London, Italy, they're all saying the same thing. We won't be able to breathe until you're able to breathe.
That's right.
Today, we are able to breathe again.
We won today, but there's so many other families that have not received justice, so the fight has to continue. So we're going to continue to fight for those families and as well make sure that people remember my uncle's name.
We're going to try to leave here today knowing that America is a better country.
Yes.
America, let's pause for a moment to proclaim this historical moment, not just for the legacy of George Floyd, but for the legacy of America.
The verdict also set off celebrations not only in Minneapolis but across America. Hundreds gathered around the intersection where George Floyd had died. People screamed, cheered, and many of them burst into tears as the verdict was read out.
Bill must reform the system.
I feel vindicated, but I also feel emboldened. I feel as though this makes us unstoppable. I feel like the fact that we were able to secure justice for George Floyd means that we can secure justice for every black person who was killed by police. And now we're looking to justice for Breonna Taylor. We're looking to justice for Daunte Wright. We're looking to justice for Tamir Rice, because black people do deserve justice. And this is a message to every little black child coming up that your life matters. And if your life is taken at the hands of the state, there will be consequences. And I hope every killer cop is watching and paying attention, because today the Black Lives Matter movement served notice on you.
In Washington, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris spoke after the verdict was announced. President Biden called the verdict a giant step towards justice in America, but added that much more needed to be done.
Members of the jury, I understand.
Let's also be clear that such a verdict is also much too rare. For so many people, it seems like it took a unique and extraordinary convergence of factors. A brave young woman with a smartphone camera, a crowd that was traumatized witnesses, a murder that lasts almost 10 minutes in broad daylight for ultimately the whole world to see.
I feel a sigh of relief. Still, it cannot take away the pain. A measure of justice isn't the same as equal justice. This verdict brings us a step closer, and the fact is, we still have work to do. We still must reform the system.
The verdict has brought relief to the city of Minneapolis, which has been on the edge for months now. It is also a landmark case for police and the police use of force against black people in America. And the verdict marks a significant break with the past. In the US, very few police officers have even been charged with manslaughter or murder, and fewer still have been convicted in America. Joining us on this broadcast now is WION correspondent Kate Fisher, who's joining us from Washington. Kate, the world has its eyes on this verdict, isn't it? And like we mentioned earlier, George Floyd's murder trial had shook the conscience of America, and we are seeing the scenes of celebrations from across the country. Do explain the significance of this verdict. And George Floyd's family says that fight continues for justice for other victims of police brutality in America.
Yeah, absolutely. This is way more than just a verdict for one grieving family who lost their son, brother, father in this incident. Yes, a great victory, the feeling of justice being done for them, but also this feeling across the whole country. Thousands of people took to the streets last May after George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, protesting racial injustice, protesting police brutality, particularly towards African Americans. It really ignited the conscience and the thinking of the whole country, and it spread across the world. There were protests in other countries as well. Now, with these three guilty verdicts, it feels like there has been a real historic landmark change here in the US. The first time that a case like this has seen such an overwhelming guilty verdict. As you said, it's rare, in fact, for police officers to even be charged when they are found to be involved in the death of a civilian, let alone to be found guilty of murder. And it was quite a moment when you saw, if you were watching proceedings in court this afternoon, that Derek Chauvin was handcuffed and led away to prison by a police officer, himself a former police officer, and now he will be serving his sentence for murder in jail.
Kate, President Biden himself said that, let's be clear, that such a verdict is very rare.
Yeah, incredibly rare. This doesn't happen often, if ever, at all. And this is what many analysts are saying makes it such an important moment in America's history and in the civil rights movement here, and the struggle for racial justice in the United States. This trial was different from all the others that came before it in not only in the verdict, but also in the kind of witnesses that were called by the prosecution. Again, very rare for police officers to testify against fellow police officers, yet prosecution witnesses in this trial included the chief of police, police trainers, those people that had trained Derek Chauvin and his colleagues in the use of force. And all these officers, rather than give testimony in support of Derek Chauvin and in support of one of their colleagues, they testified against him. And this kind of, the people have described it as the breaking of the silence of the blue line. This was something new for the United States. And people are hoping that, having seen this happen, that more police officers will feel able to speak out against colleagues should they feel the need to in future trials. And I think that's one of the reasons that this trial guilty verdicts were found. Not only was it that video footage, that more than 9 minutes of video showing Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck, which was so powerful and clearly helped to persuade the jury, but it was also these fellow police officers who testified against one of their own.
Kate, you've mentioned, how significant is this verdict for America at large, for American society at large, but it's also important to note here, will this verdict bring any sort of police reforms in America and the use of force that we see on a regular basis by cops in America?
Well, that is the hope from campaigners and activists. And if you listen to George Floyd's family and his attorneys speaking after those verdicts, as well as jubilation, they also talked about the fact that this was a fantastic day that needed to be celebrated, but it was just the beginning, and that now their mission was to ensure that this never happens again, and the way they see to do that is through legislation, a change in laws so that this kind of thing is outlawed and prevented, and there has to be real reform in the police departments across the US. And you heard also Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, the president and vice president, they also made remarks at the White House after the verdict, and both of them also stressed the need for reform. There is legislation going through Congress, the George Floyd Act, which his family are involved in trying to get this legislation through. They want to see reform. Kamala Harris, a former state attorney general in California, so with a legal background, also saying how important this was and urging Congress to take action on this. So I think as long as the momentum can be continued, this will see the beginning of changes to the way that policing is dealt with in this country.
Kate, I'd request you to stay with us as we shift our focus to the other huge international story and updates that we're getting at this